Stay in the shadows. Let Enzo know." "Of course." She nodded at Eloisa and Henry without really looking at them and stepped into a shadow, letting it carry her right out the door. The minutes she was in the shadow, she felt it tearing her apart. Skin, bones, every part of her, just the way Val had. She knew if she got close to him again, if she looked at him, touched him, the terrible cravings would start all over again. They had something to do with the way the ropes coming off his shadow had bound hers to his. The shadow took her to the lake itself. The moon was no more than a sliver, but it was bright enough to cast a ribbon of silver, to stream a shadow trail for her. Dark purple clouds shimmered over the lake, an ominous portent of the storm advancing on them. She thought that very fitting. There was a storm brewing between Val and her, between the two Saldi factions, between the Saldis and the Ferraros. It was all coming together quite soon in a terrible clash of violence. She was used to violence. She had been raised on it. She crouched low in the mouth of the shadow tube and stared out over the water, trying not to remember all the times she met Val at this very spot and watched the sun set over the lake, his arms around her. More than once she had glanced over to see her shadow on the ground and those ropes swirling around it, tying it tight. Only now they looked as if they were knots upon knots, impossible to pull loose. Emmanuelle forced herself to remember, looking up at Valentino's face, catching him looking at their shadows with a look of intense satisfaction. Her heart had suddenly gone crazy with trepidation, an ominous warning rushing through her bloodstream. She'd wanted to pull back and reassess, think things through. But then his mouth was on hers, and she wasn't thinking any more. That was the way it always seemed to go. Once Valentino was kissing her or touching her, all her worries disappeared. The lessons she'd learned had been harsh. She couldn't get near him, because the moment she did, something in his voice, in his eyes, always drew her back, always made her believe, no matter what the evidence showed. She looked around before she stepped out of the mouth of the tube, and then walked to the deck she was so familiar with. She'd spent time with Val here often, their secret hideaway. She'd fantasized more than once that this was her home with Valentino, and they were safe here. No one would ever get to them, tell them they couldn't be together. She curled up in one of the beach chairs, pulling her legs up and wrapping her arms around her knees, staring out over the choppy water. She just needed a few minutes to gather herself together, and then she'd be able to handle whatever Michele Saldi threw at them. The moment she allowed herself to sink into sorrow for everything she had lost, she felt it, that melody playing along her nerves, sending it throughout her body. Emmanuelle gasped and sat up straight. Damn him! She'd managed to stop that sensation over the last year, block it out completely. Somehow, those ties imprisoning her shadow so completely had connected her nerve endings to his, so that along with sexual awareness, a terrible, brutal, merciless need for him, there was this beautiful music that soothed when she was upset. At night, when she was alone and unable to sleep, he would send this music to her. The melody sang along her nerve endings, overcoming her sorrow, and easily, because it moved along her nerves, comforted her body. She would fall asleep.